Your son is still alive." Lee Hyun-woo didn't turn around. He heard the voice, small, certain, and assumed he'd misheard the rain. "Mister." He turned. A little black girl, maybe 8 years old, stood 3 feet away in a green puffer coat and mud-splashed boots. She was pointing directly at the headstone. He looked at her the way he looked at men who said foolish things. She didn't flinch. "That grave," she said, "it's wrong." "You see that name?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Lee Jinwoo, my son. He died 14 months ago. I have the death certificate. I have the funeral photographs." His jaw tightened. "I have this." He held up the laminated photograph, a laughing boy, gap-toothed, his father's sharp eyes. "So whatever game you're—" "He gave me a drawing," she said, "this morning." The photograph slipped from Lee Hyun-woo's fingers. He stared at this child, this small, unafraid child, and for the first time in 14 months, something cracked open in his chest that wasn't grief. "Say that again," he whispered. "If you believe a child's truth is more powerful than a powerful man's lie, welcome to Toni's Mafia stories. You're exactly where you belong. Your son is still alive. I saw him this morning." The words hung in the rain like smoke. Lee Hyun-woo had spent 14 months learning to live inside a silence that never fully closed. He had learned to eat in it, to sign documents in it, to stand in boardrooms and give orders in it. He had not learned how to stand in a cemetery in the November rain while an 8-year-old girl looked at him like she was waiting for him to catch up. He rose from his knees slowly, not because his body was slow, because he was thinking. Behind him, at the iron gate, Sergeant straightened. Hyun-woo didn't look back. He already knew what Sergeant was doing. Sergeant was always doing the same thing, watching, measuring, calculating threats. It was why he was useful. It was why he was still alive. Margaret Bowers did not move. Any other man would have frightened her off. Hyun-woo had a particular quality of stillness that adults found difficult to withstand. A stillness that made a room feel smaller, that made people suddenly remember prior commitments. This child stood in it like she was standing in the weather, like it was simply something happening around her that she had already accounted for. "Say that again," he said, quiet, careful. She pointed at the headstone. "Lee Jinwoo, that's what it says, but that's not him in there." She paused. "Is it?" His jaw tightened. "Who sent you here?" "Nobody." "Who told you to say that to me?" "Nobody. I figured it out myself." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a small square of paper, creased and soft from handling, a crayon drawing of a boy standing next to a fence. The boy had a gap in his front teeth. "He drew that. He gave it to me. He said his name was Jin." The sound that came out of Hyun-woo's throat had no name in any language he spoke. He took the drawing with the focused care of a man who has learned that the wrong movement at the wrong moment changes everything irreversibly. His hands, which had done things he would never detail in any courtroom, were perfectly still. He studied the drawing for a long time, long enough that Margaret shifted her weight once, then went still again, the practiced stillness of a child who has learned that patience is sometimes the only leverage she has. Where had she been for 3 weeks before she approached him, and why today? "Where?" he said. "I'll take you," Margaret said, "but you have to come alone, no big men." She glanced past his shoulder at Sergeant. "He scares people." Hyun-woo heard himself say, "All right." He turned and made a small gesture, 2 fingers, flat. "Stay." Sergeant's eyebrows moved approximately 1 millimeter. For Sergeant, that was astonishing. Margaret walked deeper into the cemetery. Hyun-woo followed. At the back fence, she stopped and looked down. A gap at the base of the iron bars, just wide enough for a child. And in the mud beyond it, small, fresh footprints leading away into the gray. "He was here an hour ago," she said quietly. "He saw your car." Hyun-woo stared at the footprints for a long moment, small, pressed deep into the soft mud, the tread of a child's shoe. And then he crouched down and looked at them the way a man looks at something he is afraid to want too much. "How long has he been back there?" he asked. 3 weeks, Margaret said, "since before I talked to you." 3 weeks. His son had been 40 feet from this headstone for 3 weeks, and Hyun-woo had come and knelt and pressed his hand against cold marble and driven away. He filed that knowledge somewhere deep and kept his face still. "Tell me about him," he said. Margaret told him. She spoke the way children speak when they have paid very close attention to something, carefully, in order, without decoration. Jinwoo was thin. He had a scar on his left hand he wouldn't explain. When he was frightened, his words came out mixed, Korean and English tangled together, and he seemed embarrassed about it afterward. He cried at night but tried to keep it quiet, which Margaret said she could tell because she knew what trying to be quiet crying sounded like. Hyun-woo listened to all of it without a single interruption. People who knew him would not have recognized this. Lee Hyun-woo did not let other people finish their sentences. It was not rudeness, it was efficiency. He processed faster than most people spoke, and he had never seen a reason to pretend otherwise. But he stood at this back fence in the November rain and let an 8-year-old girl tell him everything, and he did not say one word until she was done. Jinwoo had escaped from a place called Brightfield House, a residential treatment facility, Margaret said, repeating the words carefully, the way she'd heard them. He'd been there 5 months. He found a moment when a side gate was left unlatched and he ran. He told Margaret his father thought he was dead. He told her they had made him sign a paper. What kind of paper does a 14-year-old boy sign? Hyun-woo did not ask this aloud. Who runs Brightfield House? He said instead. Margaret shrugged, but then she reached into her pocket and produced a laminated ID badge, small, rectangular, the kind that clips to a lanyard. He took it off one of the workers. He said it was the only thing with an address on it. Hyun-woo took the badge. He looked at the name on it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted the way ice shifts when the temperature underneath it has already decided what comes next. He knew that name. Not as a stranger's name, as the name of a man inside his own organization, a man who had handled the paperwork around Jinwoo's illness, who had arranged the private ambulance, who had told Hyun-woo, with a steady voice and steady eyes, that his son had gone too fast for anyone to intervene. He said he wants to come home, Margaret said, but he's scared you won't believe he's really him. The pause that followed was long and rain-filled. He said that. Yes, sir. Hyun-woo crouched down slowly until he was at her eye level. It had been a very long time since he had done that for anyone. Where does he go during the day? He asked. Margaret looked away, then back. He made me promise not to tell, but... She stopped. From somewhere beyond the wall, faint, unmistakable, came the sound of a boy's voice, speaking in Korean. Lee Hyun-woo went completely still. He knew that voice. He had been hearing it in his sleep for a year. The boy came around the corner of the maintenance shed and stopped. He was taller than Hyun-woo remembered. His face was thinner, the childhood softness worn away by something that should not have had access to a 14-year-old. He was wearing a coat 2 sizes too large, olive green, a man's coat cut down to nothing on his frame, and he was holding a juice box in both hands like it was the only solid thing in the world. They looked at each other across 12 feet of wet gravel. Hyun-woo had imagined this moment. In the worst hours of the past 14 months, the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the silence in his house became something he could feel against his skin, he had imagined finding out that the death certificate was wrong. He had imagined what he would do, what he would say, how it would feel. He had not imagined his son's face. Jinwoo was afraid of him. Not startled, not overwhelmed. Afraid, the specific, careful fear of a boy who has learned to read a room and has already read this one and is not sure whether to stay. Jinwoo, Hyun-woo said, just the name. He had nothing else that wouldn't break something. Jinwoo's mouth opened, closed, he tried again. They said, his voice cracked across the middle of the sentence. He pulled in a breath and pushed through it. They said you signed the papers. They said you put me there because I was too much trouble, because the business was more important than, he stopped. His jaw worked. Than me. The silence after that was the largest thing in the cemetery. Who had told him that, word for word, who had sat across from a 13-year-old boy and said your father chose his business over you. Hyun-woo would find that answer, but not yet. He did not rush to explain himself. He understood, in some wordless part of him, that Jin-woo had earned the right to say what he'd said, and that a man who speaks before the wound has fully landed is a man protecting himself, not his son. So he stood in the rain and let every word settle into him the way cold settles into bone. "I signed nothing," he said, when he was sure he could say it evenly. "I was told you were gone. I was given a death certificate. I have come to that grave every month for a year." He paused. "Someone lied to both of us, and I am going to find out who. But first I need you to tell me everything that happened, from the beginning." Jin-woo looked at Margaret. Margaret gave him one small, decisive nod. Jin-woo crossed the gravel. He didn't reach for his father, but he stood close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and he began to talk. Margaret sat down on a nearby stone bench, pulled a cracker from her coat pocket, and ate it quietly while the two of them tried to rebuild something the world had worked very hard to bury. Hyun-woo listened. He listened the way he had listened to Margaret, without interrupting, without rushing. He listened until Jin-woo reached the night the men came for him. The car, the men's faces, the way nobody explained anything, just moved him through rooms and doorways until he was somewhere he didn't recognize. And then Jin-woo said, almost as an afterthought, "One of them had a ring, a thick silver one with a red stone. I remember because it caught the light when he opened the car door." Hyun-woo's breath stopped. He knew that ring. He had given it himself 7 years ago to a man he trusted with his life, and had trusted every day since. If you've ever watched a child have to be braver than the adults around them, drop a heart. Subscribe, because whoever put that ring on the wrong man's finger is about to find out exactly what kind of father Lee Hyun-woo really is. The ring belonged to Cho Di-han. Hyun-woo did not say the name aloud. He filed it where he filed things that required careful handling, deep, still, out of reach of his face, and he finished listening to his son. By evening, Jin-woo and Margaret were installed in a quiet house in a neighborhood that had no connection to Hyun-woo's name or his business. 2 men he trusted beyond accounting stood outside. Inside, Ms. Dorothy Bowers moved through the kitchen with the unhurried authority of a woman who has made herself at home in difficult circumstances before and will do so again. Hyun-woo explained the situation to her in the front hallway, as much as she needed to know, which was less than the full truth and more than most people would have been told. Ms. Dorothy listened with her arms folded and her eyes on his face, the way a woman listens when she is deciding not what she thinks of the information, but what she thinks of the man delivering it. When he finished, she said, "I figured something was wrong with that child from the first night." She did not ask what he did for a living. She asked whether the house had a washer and dryer. On the stairs, Margaret sat and listened to all of it and said nothing. Hyun-woo drove back to his own world and began to move, quietly, without announcement, the way water moves under ice. He pulled surveillance from his own network, camera feeds, financial records, the travel logs and communication patterns of his inner circle over the past 18 months. He was not looking for obvious errors. Obvious errors were for amateurs. He was looking for the shape of something built slowly and carefully by someone who knew exactly how he thought. Cho Di-han had been with him 11 years. Logistics, transport, the movement of people and things from one place to another without leaving a visible trail. He was one of 3 men who had known Hyun-woo's travel schedule on the night Jin-woo was taken. Who were the other 2? That question would need its own answer, in its own time. What Hyun-woo found first was money. $2.3 million, materialized over 18 months through 3 shell companies, and arriving, finally, at a single transaction paid to the administrator of a private residential facility. The paper trail was not hidden so much as buried, layered under enough legitimate-looking transactions that a casual look would slide right past it. But Hyun-woo was not a casual look. Ro Sung-il had built the paperwork. Cho Di-han had moved the boy, but neither of them was the architect. Executors did not design operations. Somebody above them had decided that a grieving father was easier to manage than a father with his son beside him, and had been right for 14 months. Hyun-woo sat alone in his office with the laminated ID badge on the desk, and the silence where his son's voice used to be, and he understood something he had always known but had never had pointed at himself. The most dangerous betrayals are the ones that arrive dressed in 11 years of loyalty. He picked up his phone. He did not call anyone inside his organization. He called a woman named Yolanda Freeman, retired detective sergeant, the one investigator who had spent 4 years building a case against him without once accepting an envelope or a favor or a reason to look away. He had respected her for that since the day she finally closed the file. "Freeman," he said when she answered, "I need to hire you." A pause. Then her voice came back flat and completely unsurprised, as if she had been keeping this particular line free. "I know about Brightfield House," she said. "I've known for 6 months. I was waiting for someone with enough resources to do something about it." Another pause. "Took you long enough." They met the next morning at Yolanda Freeman's kitchen table, which was covered in printed files organized with the quiet precision of a woman who has been doing this long enough to know that paper is harder to delete than a server. Yolanda was 61 years old and built like someone who had stopped caring what rooms thought of her long ago. She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down and began to talk, and what she said rearranged everything. Jinwoo was not the only child. There were 7 others, all connected to powerful men, all placed at Brightfield House by someone inside their father's organizations. The facility was not a treatment center. It had never been a treatment center. It was a storage operation. Children kept alive, kept controlled, kept available insurance policies in human form, held against the day their fathers became inconvenient or needed to be steered in a particular direction. The architect was not Ro. It was not Cho. It was a man named Director Baek Sung-min, a name Hyun-woo knew the way you know the name of weather that hasn't reached you yet. Baek had no organization of his own. He didn't need one. He made himself necessary to everyone else's, inserting his people quietly into the machinery of other men's power and waiting. He had been building this for years. How many of those 7 children had fathers who still didn't know? The thought moved through Hyun-woo like cold water, and he set it aside for later, where it would sit and demand to be answered. Baek's calculation about Hyun-woo had been precise. A grieving father contracts. Narrows. Becomes easier to approach, easier to propose things to. Baek had not yet made his move because he was still placing pieces. Jinwoo's escape had disrupted a timeline that was nearly complete. "If we move too fast," Yolanda said, "he disappears those children permanently. He has contacts in the department and he has ears in your world. We have to be careful and we have to be exact." "Then we will be," Hyun-woo said. "There's something else." She slid a photograph across the table. "The person who vouched for Ro Sung-il 8 years ago, who introduced him to your organization and told you he was trustworthy. Do you know who that was?" Hyun-woo looked at the photograph. His expression did not change. That was the training of a lifetime. But his hand, resting on the table beside his coffee cup, closed into a fist so slowly and so completely that Yolanda, who had watched dangerous men for 30 years, went very still. The photograph showed a woman at a restaurant. She was leaning forward, listening to something Baek Sung-min was saying. She was smiling. On her wrist was a jade bracelet, the one Hyun-woo had given her the morning Jinwoo was born. His ex-wife, Jinwoo's mother. From the corner of the kitchen, where she had been sitting with a notebook that was theoretically homework, Margaret said, in a voice small and careful as a footstep on thin ice, "Is that Jinwoo's mom?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Hyun-woo stood. He picked up the photograph and placed it in his jacket pocket, over his chest, next to the laminated photo of a laughing boy with a gap in his teeth. "We move in 4 days," he said. Then quietly, in a voice meant for no one in particular, "Don't tell my son, not yet." His own son's mother. If this story just reached somewhere deep in you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe. Because in 4 days, Lee Hyun-woo is going to make sure nobody in that room walks away untouched. The 4 days were not dramatic. That was precisely what made them dangerous. Yolanda worked her side with the methodical fury of a woman who has spent a career watching men cover for each other inside systems built to let them. She contacted 2 federal investigators she trusted, both women, both quietly enraged, both the kind of professional who keeps their anger cold and their documentation exact. Together, they built an evidence package around Brightfield House that was airtight, time-stamped, and stored in 3 separate locations. Nothing that could be touched. Nothing that could disappear. Hyun-woo worked his side differently. He went to every meeting, signed every approval, sat across from Ro Sung-il on the second day, and listened to the man give a routine operations report and nodded at the appropriate moments and gave nothing away, not a flicker, not a degree of temperature change in his eyes. He was a man still deep in grief, still not looking too closely at anything. He was giving Baek Sung-min nothing to react to. Beneath that stillness, he was moving everything. He identified which of his people were clean, a shorter list than he would have liked, a longer list than he had feared, and repositioned them around the operation without explanation. He built a set of financial documents that mirrored Yolanda's shell company trail exactly, the kind of side-by-side comparison that makes the full picture visible to any judge in any courtroom in the country. He worked at night, alone, and he did not sleep much. What he had not yet resolved was how much Baek's network extended beyond what Yolanda had mapped. The 7 children accounted for, the agents inside 4 organizations identified, but a man like Baek Sung-min did not build one contingency. He built several. On the 3rd day, Margaret asked to see Jinwoo. Ms. Dorothy brought her to the safe house. Jinwoo was at the kitchen table, drawing pencil on the back of an envelope, focused the way he used to get as a small boy with paper and crayons. A detail grief had buried so completely that remembering it now arrived in Hyun-woo's chest like a splinter working its way out. Margaret sat across from Jinwoo and slid a juice box across the table without ceremony. Jinwoo took it. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. There is a language between children who have had to survive things no one prepared them for, and those 2 spoke it without thinking. Hyun-woo watched from the doorway. Beside him, Ms. Dorothy stood with her arms folded. "She wasn't afraid of me," he said. "Your granddaughter." "She's afraid of plenty," Ms. Dorothy said. "Heights, loud dogs, the radiator at 3 in the morning. A pause. "She wasn't afraid of you because she looked at you and saw a father. Children see that before adults do." Hyun-woo nodded once and turned away before his face became something he'd have to account for. On the 4th morning, the summons went out. Ro Sung-il, Cho Dehan. Baek Sung-min reached through a channel that appeared, to all visible evidence, to originate from inside his own network. They arrived at separate locations within the same hour. They each found federal agents, warrants, and a paper trail so complete it read like a confession someone had already signed. Baek Sung-min was calm in handcuffs, composed the way a man is composed when he still believes he holds something. He said one thing before his lawyer arrived. "Tell Lee Hyun-woo his ex-wife sends her regards, and that the boy isn't the only leverage I have." Hyun-woo had the message before Baek's lawyer reached the building. He did not panic. Panic was for men who hadn't planned past their first move. He called Yolanda, who picked up on the first ring and said, "I know. I've had eyes on 3 possible locations since day 2. She had anticipated a contingency because she had spent 30 years watching what happens when cornered men stop having anything to lose. The secondary leverage was not another child. It was a file, digital, encrypted, distributed across multiple servers in a configuration designed to survive the arrest of any single person. 3 years in the building. It contained transactions, orders, and decisions that would expose Hyun-woo and 11 other figures across 4 separate organizations. Baek's dead man's switch. The file released automatically unless a specific key was entered every 72 hours. The clock was already running. Yolanda's federal contacts mobilized. Hyun-woo returned to the safe house and said nothing to anyone about what was happening, which meant he sat in the front room with his hands quiet on his knees and waited, which was the hardest thing he had done in 4 days full of hard things. What else had Baek built that they hadn't found yet? That question had no answer until it did, and the not knowing was its own particular weight. Jinwoo found out about his mother from a phone call he wasn't meant to hear. He didn't say anything. He went to his room, closed the door, and sat on the floor with his back against the bed. Very still, very quiet, the way children go quiet when the world has placed something on them that belongs to adults and they have no choice but to hold it anyway. Margaret knocked 20 minutes later. He didn't answer. She pushed the door open and sat down on the floor beside him without asking permission, because she was not the kind of child who waited for permission when someone needed company. For a while, neither of them said anything. "She's bad," Jinwoo asked finally. "I think so," Margaret said. She had never been able to lie convincingly to someone she had fed crackers and juice boxes for 3 weeks, and she didn't try now. Jinwoo pulled his knees to his chest. "She used to make me rice porridge when I was sick, the kind with the egg in it." A pause. "I kept thinking about that at Brightfield, that she would come." Margaret said nothing. She just sat there. It was exactly the right thing. After a long time, Jinwoo said, "He looked at you like that," Margaret said, and then he dropped the photograph. "I don't think he does that for many people." The silence between them eased into something that was almost bearable. Yolanda's team found the primary server. The encryption was dismantled with 6 hours to spare. Beek's leverage dissolved. Then Yolanda called, and her voice had a quality in it that made Hyun-woo's hand tighten on the phone before she spoke. "There's something else on these servers," she said carefully. "Something that has nothing to do with Beek. It has your ex-wife's name on it and a date 6 years ago." A pause. "You need to see this. Subscribe and share this, because the truth about 6 years ago is going to change everything you think you know about this story." Hyun-woo read the files, then he read them again. 6 years ago, Na Soo-yeon had found something, documentation, specific and sourced, indicating that rivals were positioning Hyun-woo for a fall that would be permanent. Not prison. Erasure. She had believed with the particular conviction of a woman who loves someone she has also decided she cannot save by conventional means, that she needed to act outside of him to protect him. She went to Beek Sungmin. She gave him information. In exchange, she received what she believed was a guarantee of safety for Jinwoo, a promise that whatever happened, the boy would not be touched. Beek had taken the information and then taken her, slowly, in increments she could always rationalize. Each small cooperation made the next one harder to refuse. He never threatened her directly. He never showed her the full architecture of what he was building. He simply ensured that by the time Jinwoo was taken, she was too far in to climb out cleanly, and so she told herself Brightfield was temporary, manageable, a situation she could quietly resolve when the moment was right. Has she ever actually tried? That was the question Hyun-woo sat with longest, and the one he could not fully answer from the files alone. He had been sitting for a long time when he stood up and drove to where Yolanda had kept Na Soo-yeon. Not arrested. Not yet. That option preserved deliberately, in a federal interview room that smelled of fluorescent light and recycled air. They looked at each other across 3 years of silence and 1 year of grief. "Did you know he wouldn't be safe?" Hyun-woo asked. Her jaw worked. "I told myself he would be." "That is not what I asked." The pause stretched. "No," she said very quietly. "I didn't know, but I stopped asking because I was afraid of what the answer would be." She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, I know that isn't enough." It wasn't enough. They both knew it. The knowing sat between them in the room like a third person neither of them had invited. "He asks about you," Hyun-woo said. "He still remembers the rice porridge." Na Soo-yeon broke then, not loudly, not with drama, but in the way a person breaks who has been carrying something past the limit of what a person can carry, and someone has just named the exact weight of it. Quietly, from the inside out. Hyun-woo stood. "You will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You will tell them everything." He stopped at the door. "And then we will discuss what comes next, for his sake, not ours." He walked out. Yolanda was in the hallway. She fell into step beside him without a word. "The hearing is in 3 days," she said. "I know. The paper trail is strong enough without your testimony." "I know," he said. "I'm testifying." That evening, Jinwoo found his father on the safe house steps and sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Jinwoo said, "Whatever happens, I don't want to go back to that grave." Hyun-woo looked at his son. "You won't." A pause. "There's something I need to tell you about your mother." They sat on those steps for a long time after Hyun-woo finished talking. Jinwoo didn't cry. He just listened, and then he was quiet in the way that means a person is rearranging something fundamental inside themselves, taking apart what they thought was true and deciding what to do with the pieces. He didn't ask many questions. The one he asked, Hyun-woo answered honestly. The hearing lasted 2 days. Baek Sungmin's legal team was expensive and formidable, and in the end, beside the point. The paper trail was exact. The testimony was exact. Yolanda Freeman took the stand in a dark blazer with her files tabbed and color-coded and delivered 30 years of professional precision to a courtroom that understood, by the end of her testimony, that it was in the presence of someone who had waited a long time to say all of this out loud. Hyun-woo testified for 3 hours. He did not minimize what he was or soften what he had done in his life. He answered every question plainly, without evasion, because he had decided that was the only way to do this with any integrity. But when he described the year of monthly visits to that grave, when he described the photograph worn soft at the corners, when he described a little black girl in a green coat standing in the rain and pointing at a headstone and refusing to be afraid, the courtroom went completely silent. The kind of silence that means something true has just been said in a room full of people who recognize truth when it lands. What would Jinwoo do, eventually, with what he knew about his mother? That answer belonged to time, not to this room. Margaret was at school. Ms. Dorothy had insisted, and Margaret had accepted this with the pragmatic dignity of a child who understands that the world keeps its schedule regardless, and you keep up with it. But she knew what day it was. She knew what was being decided. The verdict took 4 hours, guilty on all primary counts. Baek Sungmin, 22 years minimum. Roh and Cho, reduced sentences for full cooperation. Na Soo-yeon, whose testimony had helped close the case completely, received a suspended sentence and 5 years of supervised compliance. It was not nothing. It was not enough for what had been taken. It was what the law could hold, and Yolanda made her peace with that the way she had made peace with imperfect systems her entire career. Not by approving, but by understanding the difference between the justice you can deliver and the justice you would prefer. Hyun-woo was not arrested. He lived in a space the federal case did not reach. Yolanda knew that. She had known it from the beginning. The day after the verdict, he drove to the cemetery. Jinwoo was beside him. Ms. Dorothy came. Margaret was already there when they arrived, standing in her green coat, laundered, but the same coat, with her hands in her pockets and her eyes on everything, patient and watchful in the way she had always been. The grounds crew lifted the headstone out of the earth. No ceremony, no words, just marble rising from wet ground, and beneath it a rectangular patch of dark soil, open and plain and unremarkable. And beside it, Lee Jinwoo, 14 years old, standing in a cemetery where his own name had been carved in stone, watching the lie get taken away. His father stood beside him, their shoulders touched. Jinwoo reached down and took a handful of soil from where the stone had been. He held it for a moment. Then he opened his hand and let the wind take it. "It's just dirt now," he said. "Yes," his father said. Margaret stepped forward and put her small hand in Jinwoo's. He didn't pull away. The 4 of them stood together in the November rain, a Mafia boss, his son, an old woman, and a little girl who had never been afraid of the right things, and for a moment the cemetery was the quietest place in the world. Later in the car, Jinwoo fell asleep against the window. Hyun-woo drove without the radio, without calls, with his son breathing softly beside him and the photograph pressing warm against his chest from inside his jacket pocket, where it had lived for 14 months and would live a while longer, because some things you don't put down until you're ready. Ms. Dorothy's voice came from the back seat, dry and warm as good wood. "You know what that child asked me, when she came home the day she talked to you at the grave. Hyun-woo glanced at her in the mirror. She asked if I thought you were going to be mean to her. I told her I didn't know. A pause. She said she was going to talk to you anyway. She said, "Grandma, he's crying over a grave. People who are crying over graves need somebody to tell them the truth." Hyun-woo was quiet for a long time. "She was right," he said. Margaret was already asleep, her head tipped against Ms. Dorothy's arm. The most powerful man in 3 states drove through the rain with a car full of sleeping people and felt, for the first time in 14 months, that he had nowhere more important to be than exactly here. If this story moved you, if you believe that truth told by a child in a green coat is sometimes the most powerful thing in the world, subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that love does not stay buried.